When an arrogant billionaire woman mocked a black janitor, "If you can play that piano, I'll marry you," she had no idea that night would become the greatest shock of her life. That night, New York blazed with light. Outside the Whitmore Grand Hotel, spotlights swept across the red carpet, cameras flashing like bursts of fire. Inside the grand hall, crystal chandeliers spilled golden light over marble floors, and evening gowns brushed past each other with carefully practiced smiles. It was a typical high society fundraising gala, where stories of generosity flowed as smoothly as the champagne, and the hands that had polished the floors since dawn seemed to vanish into thin air. Marcus Reed pushed his cleaning cart along a side corridor, the rags folded with the same precision he'd kept for 5 years working here. He knew the silent language of this space, the cool nods, the eyes that looked past your shoulder, the way footsteps shifted away from the camera frame. A PR staffer passed, clipboard in hand, tilting her chin slightly. "Let's make sure staff stay out of the frame, thanks." Her tone was neither harsh nor rude. It was simply spoken as if it were a natural law, as if the lights only shone on certain people. At the start of his shift, the manager had said, "Marcus, use the service elevator, buddy. Don't cross the main hall while guests are being photographed." The buddy sounded friendly but distant, avoiding the need to read the gleaming Marcus on his name badge. A security guard happened to walk in the same direction, his glance not exactly hostile, just trained, scanning, preventing, monitoring. Marcus showed his staff ID with a polite smile. The man nodded and walked on, but when Marcus skirted the edge of the main hall to collect a few empty glasses, the sound of black dress shoes followed him for a few beats. On a small stage at the far end of the room sat a Steinway & Sons Model D, still and elegant like a promise. The polished black surface caught the chandelier's light, scattering it into tiny stars. Marcus paused, not because he was tired, but because a memory brushed against him. The scent of polished wood, the cool touch of ivory keys under his fingertips. He turned away. He was here to clean, not to play. The crowd flowed around him. A society lady halted when Marcus happened to step near the camera's edge. "Excuse me, go around, please." A man beckoned with a subtle wave. "Hey, you." Marcus turned. "Yes, sir, my name's Marcus." The man held out car keys, pointing toward the entrance. "Where's valet?" "Sir, I'm maintenance staff. Valet is at the front entrance." The man gave a flat "ah" and let his gaze slide off Marcus's face as if it had touched glass. Marcus was used to it. Here, slipping out of sight was a survival skill. Moving slowly at the carpet's edge, avoiding the camera's eye, circling around columns, always making sure he was the last through a doorway, so no one had to step aside for him. Occasionally, someone would mutter behind him, "You don't belong here." Not addressed to him directly, just to the air shaped like him passing by. He collected glasses, replaced ashtrays, wiped table edges. Another PR assistant hurried by, adjusting the backdrop. "Staff, please stay outside the photo line." "Understood," Marcus replied, his voice as flat as the freshly polished floor. Gloria Johnson, the veteran housekeeper, passed by and set a pack of tissues on his tray. "Marcus, take a break, have some water." "I'm fine, Miss Gloria." She looked at him a moment longer, as if she wanted to say something but knew not to in a crowded hall. From the grand doors, a group of guests entered under a choreography of lights. Smile, flash, turn, flash. Fingers touch the glass. Victoria Whitmore emerged at the end, her red silk gown catching the light like a sculpted flame. Diamonds flickered along her collarbone and wrist. She strode to the microphone, her voice firm and bright as polished glass. "We are here tonight to remind each other that hope always has a place. I trust everyone will be generous." The applause was polite, blending with the scent of expensive perfume and champagne foam. The same security guard trailed Marcus as he kept to the edge of the hall. No one had told him to. It just happened, as part of a collective reflex. When Marcus bent to pick up an empty glass, he caught his own reflection in a wall mirror. Navy shirt, black gloves, calm eyes trained over years. On the far side of the glass lay a neat story of kindness and charity. On his side was the man who polished those stories until they gleamed. A young female guest holding her phone paused where Marcus stood. "You? Sorry, could you move?" She didn't look at his name tag. "Yes, ma'am, I'm Marcus." "I'll step aside." His name fell softly between strands of background music, so light it seemed no one heard. He stopped at the edge of the stage, scanning the table set up. Napkins folded precisely, glass count correct, ashtrays under half full. Another security guard approached with a polite smile. "Sir, this area is for guests." "Yes, I'll be out once I check the glasses." "Thank you." The smile wasn't unfriendly. It just had a thin layer, default suspicion. From the mic, the PR host announced the schedule. Speeches, an art auction, then a special piano performance by a guest artist. Marcus glanced at the Steinway again. From somewhere, his old teacher's voice whispered, "Don't count the keys. Feel the music." He shook his head. Here, feelings weren't his job, invisibility was. A couple walked past, the man squinting. "Hey, buddy, spill over there." Marcus turned. "Yes, I'll get it right away." He moved like a shadow over the marble, every motion calculated to be smaller than the room. Shoulders lowered, elbows tucked, standing at an angle to give way. He had learned to exist like a ripple, present everywhere, but gone from every frame. Once in a while, a pang hit him when the piano was tested. 3 scattered chords, someone pressing the pedal. The sound was full, deep, recalling nights he sat at a piano until his fingertips numbed, trying to place a melody exactly where it belonged on the score of his life. Now, that melody sat behind a door he had locked himself. The key, he thought, was lost somewhere on the road to becoming someone no one needed to notice. "Marcus, service route," the manager reminded, eyes flicking toward the photo corner where donors lined up their smiles. "Don't cross the main hall." "Yes, sir." Marcus turned toward the service elevator. At the narrow junction of 2 corridors, he paused, not from fatigue, but to swallow something unnamed. Then he moved on. The gala was running like clockwork. Speeches on cue, laughter in the right places, cameras at the right angles. Invisibility ran just as smoothly. Staff took the back route, names blurred into buddy or you, eyes reminding, "You don't belong here." Every piece fit neatly into the gleaming machine. Only Marcus, in a brief moment before the service door closed, looked back at the Steinway. The chandelier's light spilled over the piano's surface, pooling into a quiet glow. He exhaled softly, as if placing a small stone into a river. Then he pushed his cart inside, the door closing behind him, quiet as a blink. Dignity has no uniform, it has courage. The service elevator door had barely closed softly behind him when Marcus steered his cart back toward the edge of the hall to collect the last few glasses before the speeches began. Everything was running on schedule, and he knew a single scratch in the flow could shift the entire tone of the room. A PR woman, clipboard in hand, swept past, speaking as if to the air. "Remember, keep staff out of the photo line." Across the room, a security guard unconsciously matched Marcus's movements, without needing any orders. In the camera's circle of light, Victoria Whitmore stood as if she were the fixed point of a carefully drawn graph. The red silk gown clung perfectly, diamonds catching the light, her smile set to the correct angle. In her head ran a list of risks: a major shareholder irritated by last week's labor lawsuit, an unpredictable journalist present tonight, a new donor who needed wooing. The speech outline, the camera angles, who stood with whom, what must not happen, she knew them all by heart, like multiplication tables. What she didn't factor in was the human element outside the plan. Marcus bent on one knee, reaching for a glass that had rolled deep under a table. He straightened just as Victoria turned away from a camera, flicking her wrist. Champagne splashed in a golden streak across the red silk. A breathless second passed before the room's attention shifted, eyes converging, phones lifting. "What the hell are you doing?" Victoria's voice cracked sharp as glass. Marcus placed the glass on his tray, straightened, and opened his hands as if to steady the air in the room. "I'm sorry, ma'am, Sorry?" she cut in. "You stained this dress. Do you have any idea how much it costs?" The question wasn't meant to be answered. It measured the gap between someone entitled to demand and someone who needed permission to exist. A businessman smirked. No janitor could cover a scratch on that dress. Laughter rippled on instinct. Another voice, loud enough to be heard: "People like you should stick to the back." The security guard stepped closer, not to threaten, just standing like a period at the end of an accusation. Marcus kept his voice even. "I can cover the dry cleaning bill, ma'am." He knew the words were as thin as tissue. A month's wages wouldn't survive a boutique invoice. For Victoria, the fatigue of living in a cage of expectations condensed into a reflex, reclaimed control. She half turned, pulling the room's attention back to herself. "How about this?" she said. "If you can play that piano better than a professional, I'll marry you." She smiled, the sound cold and sharp, like a command redirecting the crowd. A beat of silence, then the room erupted. Someone joked, "Careful, more white keys than black." A few token she's, but eyes kept smiling. The harmless joke slid neatly into an old mental groove. Race wrapped in laughter to avoid naming it. Standing at the fringe, Gloria Johnson tightened her hold on a packet of tissues. She looked at Marcus, then at Victoria. She recognized that look. Someone who had never had to ask themselves whether they were allowed to stand here. "No need to make this a big deal, just a little accident," a woman said, but the cameras stayed up. Marcus could have slipped into the service hall as always, becoming a gap for the wave to glide past. But tonight something in him refused to retreat. "I don't need you to marry me," Marcus said, eyes steady, voice low but clear. "If I can do it, I want you to keep your word." A few chuckles shot out, testing how serious he was. Victoria arched a brow, trying to reel the moment back into a joke. "Perfect. Show us, buddy." She pressed the word buddy like a stamp, one more way to avoid saying his name. "Make it a bet," a guest called. "500 if you play the whole piece without a mistake. 1,000 if you last more than 30 seconds. Money flicked from wallets. That clean excitement allowed them to cheer without facing the fact they were fueling a public humiliation. The PR woman glanced at Victoria. A second's frown, then a thin smile. If framed right, the clip could boost reach. In Victoria's mind, goodwill charts, audience reach, and headline potential flickered past. She'd learned to measure everything in numbers, and forgotten how to measure in people. Marcus shook his head when the bills were pushed toward him. "I'm not taking your money." "Then what do you want?" "Just one thing. If I do it, you'll remember every word you just said, in front of everyone here." A thin pause. Victoria laughed longer this time, confident she still owned the story. Deal. Plenty of witnesses here. She pointed toward the stage. That piano. The whole city's ready to watch you. The security guard walked in parallel, escorting a moving Risk. David Chen, the music critic, stood still like a comma, observing how a smirk could rewrite a person. He looked at the Steinway, then at Marcus, eyes flickering with anticipation. "Come on," someone urged, smiling as thin as a blade. "Don't keep us waiting, lots of white keys." More laughter, loud but cold. Victoria adjusted her gown. For a split second her gaze touched Marcus, not as a person but as a prop to be assessed. Deep down, the fatigue was still there. Urgent emails, early meetings, shareholder pressure. But she'd chosen to let that exhaustion spill into power, and power without restraint always found the lowest surface to pour onto. Marcus inhaled. He set the tray on the nearest table, removed his gloves, folding them neatly. All the habits of making himself smaller than the room, he performed them one last time before stepping into the space opened by eyes and cameras waiting for a fall. "After you," Victoria said, voice smooth but cold. "Time to prove it, buddy." The room swelled with an ooh of excitement. At the crowd's edge, Gloria gave the smallest shake of her head. Only Marcus saw it. David Chen stepped half a pace forward, hand in his suit pocket, ready to witness ability, not spectacle. Marcus walked. The sound of his soles on the marble barely carried, but each step seemed to reset the room's center of gravity. At the end of the path, the black Steinway and Sons Model D lay still, its lid catching the chandelier's light into its own private sky. The laughter hadn't fully faded, still falling here and there like late hail. But beneath the noise, a thin silence began to form, a space just wide enough for music, if it came, to enter. Marcus placed a hand on the stage edge. The guard stopped at the perimeter, not advancing. The PR woman stepped back half a pace, camera still rolling. Victoria kept her chin high, convinced she still controlled the moment. But for the first time that night, Marcus wasn't trying to make himself smaller. He simply stood at the full size of a man. "My name is Marcus," he said, loud enough for the first rows to hear. "Not Buddy." Then he stepped up onto the wooden riser, heading toward the piano the way a person approaches a real conversation, not a sideshow. From that moment, the night shifted, and the marriage dare that had sounded like a joke was hardening into a binding promise in front of a room full of witnesses. What came next would no longer be entertainment. It would be a test of dignity, talent, and one's word. Right after the calm statement, "My name is Marcus, not Buddy," the room seemed to drop a notch in noise. He kept walking, each step on the marble even and deliberate, not fast, not slow, as if he were resetting the dimensions of himself in a space that was never meant for him. A stack of bills slid forward, the snap of wallets opening. 500 if you play a full piece. 1,000 if you don't run off in 30 seconds. Clean excitement. They could enjoy themselves without realizing they were cheering for a public humiliation. Marcus didn't look at the money. "I'm not here to perform like a trained pet. I'm not taking your bets." Then he turned toward the one who had issued the dare. "I accept, and I only want one thing. If I succeed, Ms. Whitmore will keep her word, in front of everyone here." A few whistles rang out, half mocking, half testing. Victoria Whitmore lifted her chin, her smile locking into place. In her mind, the risk chart scrolled fast. Last week's labor lawsuit. An unpredictable journalist present. A new donor to impress. She thought in graphs and headlines, not in people. If he failed, the whole room laughed done. If he was decent, spin the narrative into a night of discovering hidden talent. What she wasn't used to was an employee demanding that she keep her word. Marcus reached the foot of the stage. 2 security guards immediately stepped in, blocking him out of habit. "Sir, this area is for performers and guests only." The tone was polite, the boundary soft, but real. Marcus stopped, didn't argue. He tilted his head so they could see to the left, a white couple leaning happily over the stage edge, taking selfies with the Steinway in the background. No one stopped them. The guards hesitated for a beat, then returned to their positions in front of Marcus. The small moment laid bare the skew in the room. Same rule, enforced for only one person. At the edge of the hall, Gloria Johnson saw it, her lips pressing together. This wasn't the first time. A deep, clear male voice cut in, "Let him through." David Chen, the music critic, had been standing nearby. He didn't raise his voice, just shifted his shoulder slightly. "Tonight I want to hear music, not watch barricades move." The guards glanced at each other, then stepped half aside, opening the path but still flanking him, as if escorting a risk in motion. Victoria's brow tightened just slightly. She didn't like anyone else setting the rhythm. PR touched her sleeve and murmured, "Better if Chen speaks up, adds legitimacy." Victoria inhaled, returned her smile to its trained setting, the one she'd perfected all her life, turning emotion into procedure. A female guest muttered, "They should clean the piano too, Sweat." A light touch, bitter underneath. A polite remark carrying baked-in bias. Marcus removed his gloves, folded them neatly onto the tray. A small, decisive gesture, like shedding the invisible uniform. He looked up at Victoria. "Let's confirm one last time. You said, if I play better than a professional pianist, you'll marry me. I don't want that. I want you to keep your word, in whatever way you can, publicly." A male guest laughed. "Smart. Customizing the prize." Another added, "Keep her word how?" "Write a check." Marcus shook his head. "I don't need a check. I need proof that words here carry weight." David Chen nodded. "You're talking about public accountability." "Yes?" In Victoria's eyes a flicker of hesitation, then it was gone. Around the room, phones were raised, tiny lights blinked. The risk chart ran again. Labor hashtags, conservative shareholders. She smiled, stamping it shut. "We're all witnesses here." David Chen followed. "And if he plays at a professional level, I'll say so to the press." A few short bursts of applause. Part of the room was ready to value principle, not just spectacle. Marcus nodded, stepped onto the riser. One guard instinctively shifted closer. Marcus didn't look at him, only at the path ahead. For years, it had always been blocked by mechanisms dressed in courtesy. Tonight, he was walking through, under his own name. "Let him through," David Chen repeated, as if placing a period at the end of the sentence. The guard froze, then moved to the edge. Below, the selfie couple still joked about white keys, black keys. No one shushed them. The entire room's eyes were on one man, and its expectations gathered for a fall. Marcus stood before the Steinway & Sons Model D. He placed his palm on the lid, cool, solid, familiar. He didn't open it yet. He looked down, calling the challenger by name. "Miss Whitmore, I want to hear you say one thing. Clearly, I will keep my word." For the first time that evening, Victoria missed half a beat. She wasn't used to reading lines someone else had written, but in front of too many cameras with PR nodding for her to lock the narrative, she lifted her chin. "I will keep my word." The final syllable was thin as wire. It was both a promise and a fence. Gloria released a breath only Marcus noticed. He lifted the lid. The hinge gave a soft, clean click. In the front row, a woman whispered to her friend, "What if he really can play?" The friend shrugged. "Then we've got a good story." They still spoke about a story, not a man. Victoria kept her smile, her thumb brushing the now dry champagne stain. The fatigue at the base of her neck, day-long meetings, urgent emails, difficult shareholders, had been poured into a dare, as easy as snapping her fingers. A discordant thought crossed her mind. Why had she tossed that line so easily? Then the PR logic covered it again. If he's good, we discover talent. If he's bad, the room laughs. Win-win. Somewhere, the word dignity still waited outside the door. Marcus pulled the bench out and sat. He checked his distance from the keys, dropped his shoulders, loosened his wrists, old rituals returning like muscle memory. He spoke loud enough for the first rows to hear. "Thank you for making way." It sounded polite, but anyone hit by it would understand. He was speaking to the guards, and to a system that had long kept him at the hall's edge. The crowd steadied itself with a few jibes. "Get on with it. Don't keep us waiting." At the fringe, the man from earlier murmured, "Look, his hands are shaking." His friend replied, "Of course they are. Who wouldn't here?" David Chen gave a small smile. "Shaking or not, the music will answer." Marcus set his fingertips on the keys, just touching, not pressing. The air felt taut and thin, as if waiting for a snap. He had refused the money, made "I will keep my word" echo in front of witnesses, and walked through the barrier under his own name. All that remained was the sound of the piano. All that remained was the sound of the piano, and when it came, it arrived not with noise, but with a breath that seemed to touch the air itself. Marcus struck the first key as if tapping gently on the surface of water. No showy rubato, no flourished runs, just a clean note, then a second that opened the door for summertime to step in. He chose a tempo half a beat slower than usual, giving each phrase room to breathe. His left hand laid down a soft foundation, like bare feet on a summer sidewalk. His right hand spoke sparingly, each note falling with exactly the weight it needed. The pedal was pressed briefly, released quickly, letting the resonance cling to the marble of the hall before dissolving like mist. Marcus wasn't telling a story. He was setting down sentences. The silence between them didn't block the listener's ears. It invited them closer. In the second row, the man who had joked about white keys, black keys, left his smile hanging midair. Then it folded in on itself, extinguished like a candle capped under glass. His champagne stopped trembling. A woman recording video tapped her phone off, laying it face down as if afraid to make noise. The room's laughter didn't vanish instantly. It shrank, dried, and rolled to the edges. David Chen leaned forward, his trained eye missing nothing. The way Marcus anchored a low note to keep the line centered. The way he sidestepped flashy technical riffs in favor of restraint. Beautiful touch, warm tone, not a warmth achieved through tricks, but through intent. A player who knows what he's saying, and to whom. David noted how Marcus bent two blue notes at just the right moments, holding and releasing them so that a familiar melody became strange again. In the front row, Victoria Whitmore kept her polite smile, but her jaw softened a notch. She had prepared two neat scenarios to spin the narrative, yet this sound belonged to neither. From a thin seam in memory, she saw herself at 10, sitting at the old upright at home, her elderly teacher pressing her hand down and saying, "Silence is also a note, young lady." Victoria had hated that lesson. Back then, silence meant absence. No money, no power, no applause. But now, the silence Marcus poured into the room carried a different weight. The Steinway answered him as if it had known him for years. In the bridge, Marcus tilted the harmony into shade. Not darkness, just depth. He held a single note long enough for people to realize they were waiting. And that moment shifted the room. From a crowd hungry for spectacle into an audience listening. Servers slowed their steps. Security guards lowered their shoulders. The PR rep, for the first time all night, stopped checking her mental dashboard. Marcus looked at no one. His posture was calm. Shoulders dropped, back easy, eyes sometimes half closed. Not in performance affectation, but because he was listening to the way the notes touched the walls, echoing back like waves. He wasn't presenting himself. He was returning to himself. Each phrase he laid down rewrote a line on a resume that had been crossed out. No more buddy, no more you, no more people like you. Here, in this moment, was Marcus Reed, a man with a name, with a voice. From her spot at the edge of the hall, Gloria Johnson's eyes glistened. When Marcus slid into a small ornament, she thought of all the mornings she'd watched the staff clock in, each carrying a life no one bothered to ask about. She felt this music walk alongside them, as if someone had stepped out from the service hallway, set a chair in the middle of the red carpet, and said, "Sit, tell me." Somewhere across the room, the hum of the HVAC, background noise everyone had lived with, vanished from consciousness. The man with the cigar lowered his hand. A woman adjusted her shawl and forgot to finish, leaving her fingers resting idly in her lap. Someone started to sigh, then stopped, afraid to spill whatever delicate drop was balanced on the rim of the moment. Victoria glanced at the patch of champagne on her gown, now dried into a thin ridge. She wanted to think about image damage and media opportunity, but the thought refused to flow. She realized she had no ready words for this. She had believed everything could be labeled KPI, ROI, sentiment, but this music was labeling her back. Not heiress, not future CEO, not net worth package. It called a person out from behind glass. The sensation was as unsettling as touching a place she hadn't in years. Marcus circled a short variation, then let go of the urge to display. He stopped before the coda as if standing at a crossroads. He chose the simpler road home, returning the melody to where it began, without embellishment. It was a cultural decision. Summertime, in his hands, wasn't a finger exercise. It was a doorway into a current of memory. Porches in summer, front steps, voices that softened the edges of a long day. He didn't need to say black culture. Anyone with ears could hear its current. For a moment he looked up and caught Gloria's eyes. No smile, no nod, just a glance that confirmed he knew she was there. And therefore knew that all the people like her, those hands that polished floors to a gleam since dawn, were here too. David Chen listened closely enough to notice what wasn't played. He silently counted the length of the pause between phrases, the way Marcus returned to the tonic without weight. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice. He dipped his head slightly, as if accepting an invisible handshake. Maturity in music lies not in adding more, but in leaving more out. When the final note fell, Marcus lifted the pedal, letting the sound die away completely. No exclamation point, no fireworks, just a small round period. And then silence. Not the awkward silence of a spilled champagne moment. Not the empty silence of nothing to say. This silence had changed color. Deep, warm, present. The room seemed to inhale all at once. A single clap rang out, then halted, like someone knocking but remembering someone was asleep. Marcus didn't turn toward the audience to seek approval. He sat still, hands loose in his lap, eyes on no one in particular. His posture said the rest. I am not here to prove. I am here to name. To name myself, to name those just pushed out of the frame, to name dignity that wears no uniform. In the front row, Victoria felt a voice inside her, one she usually smothered with her calendar, stir. What have I just done to this man? The question didn't stop at Marcus. It swept back over all the staff she passed without seeing each day, over the emails requesting, use the service elevator, stay out of the photo line. It left a thin chill at her neck. She looked up at the chandelier, the light that had always sided with her, and for the first time that night she saw it as neutral. A young server, tray in hand, stood frozen as if spellbound. She swallowed hard, eyes shining for reasons she couldn't name. Beside her, the guard who had instinctively blocked Marcus let his elbows drop. He didn't apologize, didn't need to. The silence was doing it for him. Marcus touched a small closing cord, not to prolong, but to set the room back on the ground after the bend it had just taken. Then he lifted his hands from the keys, lowered the lid one notch without closing it. He turned his head to find David Chen. They didn't speak. A single nod held the whole sentence. I'm still here. Any laughter, if it still existed, was now at the margins. At the room's heart was a new quiet, one both carved by music and left behind like soil for the next thing to grow. In that place, jokes about white and black keys had no space, because people had just heard something beyond the color of the keys. Marcus inhaled, exhaled. He didn't rise. He let the room reset its heartbeat. And in the front row, Victoria, the hostess who had tossed a marriage dare like a stone into a pond, felt every ripple come back to the shore where she stood. She understood. From here on, every word she spoke would have to pass through this silence. The first piece was over. The room had changed color, and the control, what Victoria had thought was hers, was quietly sliding toward the piano. The transformed silence hadn't yet faded when Marcus tilted his head, as if listening to the room one more time. He didn't stand. He simply rolled his wrists, reset his distance from the keys, and changed languages, from the lull of summer to the clean architecture of the classics. A sonata, the skeleton of discipline, came to life. The opening theme was crisp, clear, allegro moderato. Marcus's left hand built a rhythmic wall with evenly rolled chords, mechanical in precision but never overpowered. His right hand drew a thin cantabile line, delicate yet sinewed. He used the pedal sparingly, releasing it exactly at the cut points so each movement revealed its structure instead of being cloaked in a fog of emotion. In the transition, he staged a dialogue between the two hands, a 3-2 cross-rhythm meshing like gears. Every accent landed just enough to support the next phrase, never forcing it. The room, so used to being served sensations, found itself unconsciously counting with him. The man with the cigar lowered it from his lips, setting it carefully into the ashtray as if smoke might smudge the clean lines. An older woman tilted her head, narrowing her eyes, the reflex of someone who'd once studied piano, checking the voicing. In the back row, a young man lowered his phone, forgetting vertical mode entirely. Perhaps the clip no longer seemed enough. David Chen shifted half a foot, leaning in to catch more of the mid-range. He noted the rare control, smooth legato on the 4th and 5th fingers, trills clean without stray notes, the PP to FF climb without a gasp. In the development section, Marcus carved the theme into fragments, rotated and reassembled them, the arc of dynamics rising by intellect, not adrenaline. David exhaled softly, almost to himself. Virtuoso. The word fell in 2 beats. Cautious, then certain. Marcus wasn't trying to steal hearts. He was building a bridge. Those who had come for sport understood halfway across. They were standing before art. The faint shifting of chairs subsided. The guard who had stepped in to block him earlier lowered his shoulders. For the first time that night, his eyes were not watchful, but following. Victoria Whitmore sat upright, the smile on her face like an old mask. With each phrase, she felt the invisible dashboard in her mind. KPI, headlines, sentiment. Lose signal for a few seconds before flickering back. She glanced at PR. That's enough, isn't it? The other's eyes wavered. If we cut at the peak, we'll be crucified. Victoria bristled at a situation she didn't control. She wanted to put down the period, to bring the night back onto the outline she'd planned. In the coda, Marcus let the arpeggios pass like a draft of wind, breaking on the dynamic stair just before a fort, then refusing to step on it. He returned to mezzo piano, closing the phrase with a cadence as clean as a boundary line. This was the power of control, knowing where you could be loud and choosing not to be. Another silence. This time, applause erupted instantly afterward, sharp and full. Not the polite clapping of a gala. This was recognition. A few people half rose, then one whole row stood. Prejudice hadn't vanished. It had simply stepped back, glancing around for allies. David Chen lowered his chin by exactly a centimeter, a professional's gesture. He angled slightly toward the waiting cameras. Professional standard. No waving hands, no exaggeration. A line of invisible text had just been signed and sealed. A few reporters exchanged looks. They had their pull quote. Victoria felt control slipping away like sand through her fingers. She stood in the natural pause, clipped the mic to her lapel. "Thank you," she began, voice smooth as glass. "A truly impressive performance. Now, let's—" Her words were drowned by a lone shout. "More!" Then another. "Encore!" The crowd, which she had steered from the start of the night, was now choosing its own path. PR swiveled toward her. "Let him do one more, Victoria." She pressed her jaw, thumb unconsciously rubbing the dried champagne stain. "Back to work," Victoria said quietly, mic off, aimed only at Marcus, her last attempt to snap the reins. Marcus looked at her for a beat. Not defiant, not submissive, just looking. The gaze wasn't hot, but had an edge. "You just said you'd keep your word." In the front row, a few guests turned to each other. They had heard her enough, even without the mic. Her face had said it. An older woman, silent until now, spoke up clearly. "We'd like to hear more." A heavy-set man, who'd eagerly bet earlier, nodded rapidly. "Yes, more." The young man in the back turned his camera on again, but this time to record music, not a stumble. The guard glanced at his superior. The latter shrugged and moved to the edge. The room's center of gravity had shifted away from the hostess, toward the man at the piano. Victoria set the mic down, her smile returning but thinner, almost transparent. Inside, she heard a faint crack. The image, the shell she lived in, fracturing at the seam. She worried about shareholders, about tomorrow's headlines, about dinner with the donor, but at the same time, an uninvited question came. Why do I want to cut this short? The schedule? Or because I can't stand that someone who doesn't belong here just redefined the room? Marcus swiveled his bench slightly, staying on stage. He looked over the rows calling for more, not to collect approving eyes, but to gauge the breath. He found David Chen. They caught each other's gaze amid the murmurs. David gave a small nod. Another invisible signature. Marcus placed his hands on the keys, but before playing, he said just loud enough for the first rows to hear, "Thank you. I won't make you noisier. I'll let the music do its part." He inclined his head toward Victoria, a polite gesture without submission. "I respect you, and I remember your word." He queued up the third piece in his mind, one that would drain both his technique and stamina, but didn't rush. Silence had just learned its job. Let it work one more beat. Phones lifted again, but the angles had changed. Now people were aiming for the entrance, not the fall. At the edge, Gloria Johnson laid a hand over her heart, a smile just beginning at her lips. She saw the other servers standing a little straighter, as if the spine of the whole evening shift had been realigned. The guard who often blocked Marcus stepped back another half pace, not in fear, but as if not to blur the outline taking shape. Victoria sat down. PR whispered the revised schedule. "We'll call this a special set. After this next piece, you step in to thank him and announce the auction." Victoria nodded, eyes never leaving Marcus's hands. She didn't know if she was hoping he'd stumble so she could reclaim control, or soar so she wouldn't have to hold it anymore. Marcus lowered his wrists. The opening theme of the next piece hadn't sounded yet, but the room was already leaning toward the piano. Somewhere, the feeling of sport had slipped from the grip. What remained was art, and the people standing before it, no longer hiding behind their roles. He closed his eyes for half a second, just enough to hear the clock inside click into place. Then he opened them, struck the first note. The room, like a sail catching the perfect wind, swelled, and the night, decisively, shifted into a new orbit. The very first note landed, and the entire room leaned toward the piano. Marcus locked the door behind any lingering doubt. No more lullabies, no more separate architecture of discipline. He chose an extreme technical piece. Steep double-note passages, long octave leaps, razor-close hand crossings, shifting 3 to 4 to 6 polyrhythms trading rolls without pause. This wasn't a piece to sound pretty. It was a summit that demanded both muscle and nerve. His left hand drove an ostinato smooth as a belt drive. His right hand strung staccato beats as precise as a sewing machine. In the second section, he bent the theme into a left-hand trill, a difficult, rarely chosen move, while the right hand walked the high register like a tightrope. The pedal was dotted only at phrase openings, lifted before any clouding could occur. Even on repeated note runs, he used a wrist rotary instead of the arm, keeping the speed without breaking the sound. Everything was control, no strain showing. The audience held its breath in the face of visible difficulty. The man who had once joked about white keys, black keys, drew his hand away from his glass. The security guard, who had blocked Marcus earlier, was now unconsciously leaning forward. Gloria Johnson gripped the edge of a table, the pulse in her wrist clear in each beat. The PR woman looked up from her screen, abandoning an unsent text. Laughter had slipped out of the room long ago. What remained was attention. Victoria Whitmore tried to erect a mental fence quickly. This was her event. This was her story to tell. If necessary, cut. But the music belonged to no fence. It took its own route, through the chandeliers, through the cameras, past the KPI formulas. In the coda, Marcus pushed a tremolo octave to the lip of Fort, then didn't break through. He reined it in, detoured into a short glissando, returning the phrase to piano like a graceful stop command. The break was so smooth that the whole hall felt as if it slid half a step further. Silence. One beat, two. Then an explosion. A thick, unified standing ovation erupted. The front rows stood, then the back. Chairs clattered. Glasses chimed, but no one cared. Phones rose like a forest, no longer hunting for a fall, but holding on to a moment. At the stage's edge, David Chen clapped half a beat slower than the rest, as if to measure it precisely, then spoke just loud enough to be caught by someone's recording mic, at a very high professional level. Marcus remained seated, hands loose. He didn't bow yet. He gave the room back to itself. The commotion belonged to them. Victoria took the mic. "Thank you," she began, but the clapping didn't drop. One group of guests shouted, "Encore!" Another called, "Marcus!" She tried again, her voice smooth, "We!" This time, the applause surged like a wave, not hostile, just not hers in this moment. PR whispered at her shoulder, "Don't cut it now." Her phone buzzed constantly. Internal messages, social media tags, an email from legal counsel, "Avoid binding statements. Marriage is a personal legal matter." From mid-hall, a man's voice rang out, "You said you'd marry him if he played better than a pro." Another followed, "Keep your word." Several cameras pivoted up to her face, stage lights catching the rise and fall of her collarbones with each breath. She remembered exactly the "I will keep my word" she'd said earlier, words Marcus had made her repeat. They felt like a lock now, clasped around her wrist. Not a legal shackle, but a moral one. In her head, two dashboards crashed into each other. Reputation, shareholders, donors, lawyers, marital clauses on one side, a room full of witnesses, a respected critic's professional level on the other, and a video already on fire. She knew, legally, the joke meant nothing. Marriage couldn't be coerced, she could dismiss it as hyperbole. But in the court of public ethics, she was cornered. Refuse, and the story became heiress promises, then reneges. Go along, and she was locked into a personal decision. Irrational, dangerous. Marcus rose just as the clapping dipped a notch. He didn't walk toward the mic. He bowed slightly, enough to honor the room standing. Then he looked straight at Victoria. No demand, no pressure, just the reminder in his gaze. The words are on your side. David Chen stepped half out of his row, speaking at a clip-worthy volume. From a professional standpoint, he just performed at a level I'd gladly put my name to in print. No more, no less. It was exactly the stamp that tightened the moral lock. A few donor faces turned to each other. They knew Chen's words had weight. PR nudged the mic toward Victoria. "We talk about keeping one's word and supporting talent. Flip the narrative." Her phone lit up again. An investor asking, "What's going on?" A journalist requesting a statement. Corporate counsel texting, "Do not confirm intent to marry." Victoria flashed back to her teens the first time she was told, "Don't let anyone steer you. Keep your hands on the wheel." Now, the music was steering. "We'll pause here." She tried, but another corner of the room answered, "No, more." The crowd wasn't rude, they were united. And that unity, through applause, through the critic's signature, was demanding she face her own words. Marcus lifted his hand, signaling for quiet one more moment. He said just enough. "I don't need a wedding. I need people to keep their word." The line reframed the debate, out of marital law, back into the ethics of speech. Something everyone understood, everyone could judge. An older woman, clear-voiced, with authority, called out, "You can keep your word another way. But you have to keep it." Several heads nodded. A way out cracked open. No forced marriage, but no broken promise either. Victoria swallowed hard. She wasn't cruel. She was trained to win. And winning, in her dictionary, meant never losing control. In this moment, she had to learn a new word, right. Not the right move, but the right thing. A second standing ovation rose, this one for the night's redefinition. Even the security guard clapped, offbeat but genuine. Gloria dabbed the corner of her eye with the edge of a napkin. David Chen pocketed his phone as if submitting his testimony. At the edge of the hall, an elderly lady squinted. "I know him." Her neighbor leaned in. "I think he used to be at the conservatory. Marcus Reed?" The words threaded into the taut fabric of the night, a cut that would drop the next act, revealing his identity and past. Victoria heard conservatory and felt her neck tighten. If the story turned into forgotten prodigy, every eye would swing back to judge her, not just for a cruel joke, but for abuse of power. She set the mic down and took a long breath. Before her was no longer a gala. It was an ethics trial, and the jury, already standing, was staring right at her. Marcus returned to the piano, resting his hands on the lid as if closing the file on his performance. He didn't take the mic. He let the silence do the next job, forcing the room's power holders to hear the sound of their own breathing. The room stayed still for one more beat, as if to confirm, from here on, every word would carry weight. It was in that silence, freshly reset to give weight to words, that an older woman's voice rose softly from the edge of the hall. "I know him." Heads turned. She stepped forward half a pace, adjusted her glasses. Marcus Reed." The name slipped free of the Buddy U label and dropped into the room like a latch clicking shut. A few people mouthed it back to themselves, tasting a returned identity. "He performed at the City Theater when he was 22, she said firmly. "That encore, I remember it perfectly." A silver-haired man in gold frames nodded. Yes. The music press called him a new talent. A younger guest pulled out his phone, typed quickly. The screen lit up with an old photo. A young man in a black suit bowing before a piano. David Chen narrowed his eyes, digging through his professional memory. "I read that review. And I remember a master class. My teacher mentioned your name." He turned to Marcus, nodding slightly, as if confirming a thread that had never truly broken. Victoria Whitmore's breath stuttered half a beat. She looked to PR. "Info?" The other checked her phone, whispering, "Old photos are surfacing. Hashtag number sign." Marcus Reed just popped. Victoria's own phone buzzed. An email from legal. No public statements on marriage. A text from an investor. What's going on? But the one line she couldn't sidestep was the name Marcus Reed. It rolled steadily in her mind, pushing aside words like KPI, sentiment, ROI. A space opened around Marcus. He stood straight, dipping his head slightly, as if apologizing for being recognized. Gloria Johnson stepped half a pace from the edge, her hand gripping the corner of a napkin. She hesitated. This wasn't something to parade before a crowd, but she had just watched him turned into a punchline. She raised her voice enough to carry, "If we're talking about Marcus, let me tell the rest." The room quieted instinctively before a house voice with years behind it. "Marcus's mother was sick for a long time," Gloria said plainly, adding no tears. "They lived on 2 shifts, hers and his. When her condition worsened, the medical bills came like a storm. His first piano, the one he'd saved for through scholarships and side jobs, was sold to pay hospital costs." A woman brought her hand to her mouth. A man slowly set his glass on the table. Gloria looked at Marcus, as if asking permission. He nodded, eyes closing for a beat. She continued, "He left the conservatory, took night cleaning jobs to pay rent, pay debts, survive, and music." Gloria searched for the words. Music became tied to the smell of antiseptic, to white sheets, to the sound of monitors. He locked it away. David Chen added a piece, professional but warm. Talent doesn't vanish. It buries itself when it has no nourishment. He looked around, placing the phrase where non-musicians could understand. Gloria lowered her gaze, then lifted it again, her face firming. And this isn't just about poverty. She clipped the words. Someone once told him after an audition, "We need someone who fits the hall. Hair should be tidier. Don't play with so much color. Your demeanor needs to be more professional." She didn't exaggerate. Those words were polite and dangerous for that very reason. Another time, a guard blocked him at a stage door, made him use the service stairs even though he had an invitation in hand. A small "damn" escaped from the third row, then sank. Some guests looked at each other, their own words to their staff suddenly appearing in letters before them. The barrier here wasn't brick, it was etiquette wired into the mind. Marcus heard his name repeated in the room. Marcus, not Buddy. Each time was a small hammer tapping old paint. He drew in a deep breath, held it, let it out. He didn't want tonight to become his private tragedy in public. But Gloria wasn't telling a sob story. She was naming the problem, the polished system that had pushed him to the margins. Victoria's mind flashed to the checklist she'd sent internally. Staff, stay out of the frame. Use service elevator. Don't stand in the lobby during guest check-in. She wanted to defend herself. That's procedure, not discrimination. But behind that thought came another, quieter one. Who writes the procedure? She looked at Marcus and, unbidden, saw the simplicity in his stance contrasted with the complexity of the glass casing around her own life. David Chen gave a small nod to Gloria, a thank you for naming it plainly. He added the professional credential. At the conservatory, he topped the piano class 2 semesters in a row, he said. I have an old note from a professor. Deep touch, wide ear, pedal control rare at his age. He didn't mention the times Marcus lost funding because he didn't fit the face of the program. The phrase was too sharp to throw now, but the attentive had already connected it when Gloria said, "Fit the hall." A middle-aged man frowned. That still happens today? Another sighed. It never stopped, just speaks another language. Shame, rare at a gala, was now present. Not loud, but heavy. Victoria lifted the mic, then set it down. She knew anything she said now would be filtered through the moral lens just raised. She glanced at PR. The other shook her head. Don't defend. Listen. It was advice unfamiliar to someone who lived by steering. But tonight, silence was again in the right place. Gloria closed, her voice steady. He doesn't need anyone's pity. He only needs to be called by his name and not be blocked from doors that should already be open. She turned to Marcus, smiling. Tonight you opened one yourself with music. Marcus nodded, eyes damp but steady. He looked around the room, at people who had laughed earlier, now sitting upright, at the guard who had blocked him, now slightly bowing his head, at Victoria, her face blank for a rare second, like someone seeing her true reflection. I didn't leave music because I stopped loving it, Marcus said, speaking about himself for the first time tonight, his voice low, clear. I left because every note I played took me back to the hospital room. I needed to do something simple, pay rent, pay debt, survive. He paused. Tonight, I remembered why I learned to play, not to get applause, but to be a person. The line clicked a second lock in the room. Recognition was no longer about skill. It became agreement that before them stood a whole human being. At the hall's edge, the woman who'd begun the recognition said softly, "We've lost you for too long." David Chen replied, as if entering it into the record. "From now on, write it right. Marcus Reed." Marcus nodded, a faint smile. Victoria Whitmore stood in the middle of waves moving against her. She knew the game had changed. No more cut at the PR beat, no more rewrite the narrative with a few neat lines. Before her was a man who had reset the measure of dignity, and behind her, in the phone still buzzing, was a world demanding she keep her word in its true sense. The night, from here, would not return to its old structure. And the next act, media storm, pressure, closed-door conversations, was already standing just behind the door that had been called open. The "say his name" silence had barely closed when the hall erupted in a storm of phone alerts. Screens lit up in scattered blue dots. Push notifications pinged without pause. A young man shouted, "It's on TikTok." Another added, "X is flooded with clips." On several phones, the same headline repeated, "Heiress mocks black janitor. Then he plays like a genius." Beneath it, hashtags swelled by the second. $, Marcus Reed, $, keep your word. $, Whitmore Grand. One viral edit cut Victoria's Marriage Dare directly against Marcus's Summertime and Sonata performance. A fast-moving news account slapped a small chyron across the bottom. Publicly promised marriage? At the door, security reported. News vans outside. Reporters requesting entry. The hotel's PR fielded calls stacked on calls. Legal messaged urgently, "Absolutely no confirmation of any marriage. All statements must be neutral." Two blades of social media stuck out at once. On one side, comments demanding justice piled up. "Respect dignity. Keep your word. Incredible, Marcus." On the other, the shadow side swelled. Mockery, digging into his personal life, doctored images turning tragedy into circus. Even the applause was clipped into meme format. Victoria felt control slip away like coat buttons popping loose. The metrics dashboard in her head, sentiment, reach, risk, flashed red-green like a trading floor. An investor texted bluntly, "Don't let private matters become a corporate commitment." Legal wrote, "Marriage is a personal matter, cannot be publicly binding." PR leaned close to whisper, "One wrong word and we'll spend a week cleaning up." In front of the piano, Marcus stood still. He watched the crowd spiraling into a vortex of clips. This was not what he had built tonight for. He looked up, voice calm but clear enough to carry. "We're turning tonight into a circus." A few heads jerked up. He turned to Victoria. "I suggest we speak in private. Not to hide, but to move from mockery to making it right." A ripple of dissent. "No, say it here. Keep your word in front of everyone." David Chen raised his hand for quiet. "If you want the right answer, both sides need to speak to each other like adults." He wasn't shielding anyone, he was protecting the quality of the decision. Gloria Johnson added a half-sentence leaning toward conscience. "Let them talk." Victoria met Marcus's eyes. No pleading, no threat, just an invitation. A string inside her slackened. She gave the smallest nod. PR mapped it instantly. Manager's office, second floor. Security opened a path through the sea of people and cameras, forming a corridor out of elbows and polite murmurs. A few shouts followed, but David Chen stepped in with a soft block. "You'll get your answer, give them 5 minutes." The front row felt quiet, stepped back half a pace. The cyclone swung off Marcus's heels and fixed on Victoria's back. The office door shut, the noise dropping like a dialed-down volume knob. Victoria leaned against the table, thumb rubbing the faded champagne stain, a habit when tense. Her phone glowed with incoming calls and texts. Legal team, PR group, 2 shareholders, a reporter. Marcus didn't sit. He stood a measured distance from the desk, hands loosely clasped. "I'm not here to force you into a wedding," Marcus began plainly. "I want you to keep your word the right way, to the person and to the culture of this place." Victoria looked up. "Keep your word? Can that be quantified?" Her tone stayed smooth but dry. Years of experience told her everything had to be converted into measurable units before it could be managed. Marcus nodded. "It can. 1. A public apology. Use my name, acknowledge the act and its impact, none of that if anyone was offended language. 2. Concrete commitments." He counted them off on his fingers. The Reed Family Scholarship Fund for underprivileged music students, quarterly free community concerts, and bias awareness training for management starting with you. He paused, eyes steady. 3. Procedural change. Remove the keep staff out of frame rule. Call employees by name, stop blocking service elevators without cause, set up listening sessions with frontline staff and an anonymous channel. Victoria heard training, listening, drop procedures, and felt a flicker of irritation. These, to her, were synonyms for losing control. She swallowed the reflex and asked, "And your part?" "I take no money. I take an opportunity to return to music, to play for the public, especially where music is rare. I'll advise you on building a culture of respect, not on stage, but in hallways, in emails, in meeting agendas." In Victoria's mind, two voices wrestled. The old voice, "This is a crisis. Shut it down. Forget it." The new one, quiet but right, "This is your one chance to do something that matters." She looked at Marcus, realizing what unsettled her most wasn't his demands, but his precise calm. No begging, no bargaining. He was setting the standard. Her phone buzzed again. Legal. Only say, respect for talent, commitment to inclusion. Avoid, keep your word, too risky. PR, if we pivot to scholarship plus programs, positive spin possible. Investor, avoid setting a precedent. These arrows all pointed to a safe path, speak smoothly, do little. But that safe was now dangerous. The crowd had already heard, keep your word. Dodging it would pour fuel. "If I do this," Victoria asked slowly, "will it be seen as admitting to a systemic fault?" Marcus, "If the system has a fault, admitting it is the only start to fixing it." She hesitated a beat at the simplicity of it. She'd been taught since childhood to win, not to admit. But tonight, winning meant being right. "About that line I said, 'I'll marry you.'" Marcus, "No one has the right to force marriage. You can keep your word in the human sense. Use your power to lift, not to press down." The words settled into the room like a weight that fit exactly. Not ornate, clear. They paused. The far-off noise outside the hall was like surf behind glass. Victoria, for the first time, let go of the champagne stain under her thumb. "I need one thing. I don't want to become a character in someone else's clip. If I agree, I'll say it in my own words." Marcus, "All I need is for it to be done. The words are yours. The work is ours." The door cracked open. PR poked her head in. "They're waiting." TV's already inside. David Chen stood just outside, not crossing the threshold, asking only, "You two all right?" Marcus looked to Victoria. She took a long breath, not for show, but to choose. "I'll apologize, announce the scholarship fund, the community concert program, management training, and procedural changes," she said crisply, like listing an investment portfolio. Only this time, investing in people. She looked up at Marcus. "You come with me. But when I speak, I speak." Marcus, "I'll stand there, to confirm with my name when needed. Victoria tapped out a quick message. Prep statement. No marriage mention. Emphasize, keep your word through action. Legal sent back a draft. Unconditional apology plus specific commitments. She read it, deleted the hedging phrase, if anyone was offended, replacing it with, I was wrong. A small move, but it hurt. Before opening the door, Victoria paused, asking half for business, half for truth. If I slip, what will you do? Marcus. Remind you of your word in front of everyone. She nodded, a nod accepting a binding she'd spent her whole career avoiding. The door swung open. Noise, cameras, lights flooded in like a tide. The social media storm was still there, sharp and cold, but at its center was a small space just agreed upon. A shift from mockery to making it right. And that would be the measure of what came next, whether she would keep her word in action, before a city now watching. The doors swung open, and lights and cameras rushed in like a tide, but instead of retreating, Victoria stopped squarely at the mic. Marcus angled just to her right, close enough to share the noise, far enough not to steal the frame. David Chen stood front row like an official seal, and Gloria Johnson remained at the edge of the hall, still holding the corner of her napkin. Victoria looked around the room, inhaled, and this time didn't read from the safe draft. Tonight, I was wrong. I disrespected Marcus Reed, failed to call him by name, turned my own employee into a shadow. I apologized to him and to everyone we have ever treated as invisible. The I was wrong dropped into the room clean, with no, if anyone was offended cushion. PR held its breath. Legal fired off messages, but it was already too late. In a good way. She went on steady. About the line, I'll marry you. Marriage is not something to be wagered. I will keep my word the right way, through action. Starting tonight, I'm announcing a program of rebuilding and reform. The room leaned toward the mic. Some cameras turned to capture Marcus. He neither nodded nor shook his head. He let the words run their full course. First, Victoria said, we're establishing the Reed Family Scholarship for talented music students without resources, with priority for underrepresented communities. The fund will be run by an independent board. Whitmore Group is just the sponsor. She paused half a beat. I want that name to outlast this evening. A single clap broke out. Not polite, but the reflex of seeing a door being built. Second, she raised her head, we'll launch the Keys for Dignity community concert series in Harlem and Brooklyn. Free admission, full union pay for musicians and crew. Marcus Reed will open the first show, and we commit to bringing music to places that rarely hear it. Marcus turned to her and said quietly, that's the part I agree to. Cameras caught it, quietly anchoring it to the official record. Third, Victoria said, mandatory anti-bias, DEI, training for all management, starting with me. We'll hire an independent firm, conduct anonymous pre- and post-surveys, and publish the results. A skeptical, sounded somewhere. PR stunt? But David Chen tilted his head as if marking it. Measurable means accountable. Fourth, her tone hardened, I'm scrapping the staff must not appear in frame rule when not required, and removing service elevator blockages in non-security areas. Starting tomorrow, all managers will address staff by name. She scanned the room. Anyone who doesn't stay. A wave of murmurs rippled through staff at the edges. A few instinctively adjusted their name badges, as if to make them seen. Fifth, Victoria paused, then said plainly, we're raising our minimum wage to a true living wage per city standards and adding health stipends for night shifts. Deadline, next quarter. An involuntary gasp escaped the crowd. This was no longer PR, this was budget. 6th, she slowed. Every month, I'll hold a listening session with frontline staff, with an anonymous channel direct to the executive board. No polished reports, only truth. Victoria lowered the mic a fraction, then raised it again. And finally, I'm inviting Marcus Reed to serve as my independent human values advisor for 1 year. Call it humility coaching. He'll have the right to say what I don't want to hear, and I'll be responsible for listening. A faint smile passed over Marcus's face, not for winning, but for the right thing being named. Camera shutters snapped. A reporter called out, "Do you admit you discriminated?" Victoria inhaled, "I admit bias exists in my organization and in me. I take responsibility for fixing it. Not perfect for legal, but right for ethics." Faces that had smirked earlier fell silent. Marcus asked for the mic, only for a few seconds. "Thank you. I don't need a wedding. I need what's been promised to be done. I accept the advisor role, not to grade, but to ask, how do we treat people when the cameras are off?" He handed the mic back. "Clean." Gloria tilted her head, eyes wet but dry-cheeked. She leaned toward Victoria as she stepped down. "Thank you for saying, I was wrong. From tomorrow, call me Gloria." Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Miss Gloria." The hierarchy flipped, but into its right place. In the front row, David Chen spoke just loud enough for the mics to pick up for the background of clips. "This isn't a fairy tale. This is governance. And governance means measuring promises by actions." A definition planted among the forest of hashtags. Still, the other side of social media scratched. The hashtag number PR stunt rose alongside number keep your word. One account sneered, "A few concerts and it's over." Another replied, "Living wage is real." The two edges of the internet ran in parallel, but now the checkpoints were drawn: timelines, programs, fund name, listening session schedule. Truth had a place to land. PR handed over a rough printed timeline, Q1, scholarship applications open. Next month, 2 Harlem, Brooklyn concerts. 8 weeks, first DEI training, next week. No staff and photo signs removed. Next quarter, new wage table. Victoria initialed the corner, not legally binding to the public but like a self-imposed contract. A shareholder texted, "Short-term loss." Victoria replied, "Long-term risk reduction." She knew she'd have to prove it in the quarterly report, but for the first time she felt a breath of space under the pressure. Marcus turned, offering his hand. Victoria shook it, no photo op, no performance. Cameras still pressed in, but in that clasp they split the weight in half. "Tomorrow I'll send the schedule for the first session," Marcus said. "I'll invite cleaning crews, security, kitchen staff, the ones who use the service elevator." Victoria nodded. "And I'll take that elevator with them." The words escaped before she could stop them, but they were right. A reporter threw one last question. "Do you call this keeping your word?" Victoria looked straight into the lens. "I call this keeping my word through reform. See you when we report progress." She set the mic down. "No bow. Do first, bow later." The room loosened slightly as if it had just exhaled. The social media storm still screamed outside, but at the eye of it, the frame was built. Scholarship, concerts, DI, wages and benefits, new policy, listening sessions, a human values advisor. Things that would either take root or expose who broke their word. Marcus looked at the piano for one last beat. He wouldn't play again tonight. The music had done its work, bending the room so words could enter. The rest would be timelines and labor. And as the camera lights lowered, he saw Victoria walk to Gloria first. She spoke quietly, clearly. "Ms. Gloria, thank you for reminding me with the truth." For the first time, she called a staff member by name in front of the whole hall, not to be recorded, but because it was right. The night wasn't over, but law and life had a new agreement. The rest was simple. Keep the word. They stepped out of the meeting room just as the noise in the lobby was cresting. Victoria walked half a step ahead, but when they reached the edge of the carpet, she slowed to let Marcus come level with her. PR handed her the mic. She didn't look at the teleprompter. "I'm Victoria Whitmore. Tonight I was wrong with Marcus Reed and Gloria Johnson. With the way I addressed you, my attitude, and the harm I caused to people who should have been respected." She paused for a beat. "I apologize, unconditionally." The click of cameras moved closer. She continued, shifting from words to a concrete plan. Specific timeline. Reed Family Scholarship applications open on the 15th next month. Independently managed. Board list will be announced this weekend. Keys for Dignity. Harlem. 2 Saturday nights next week at 6:30 p.m. Brooklyn, Sunday next week at 5 p.m. Free admission, full union pay. Mandatory DEI training for all management. 8 weeks. Anonymous pre- and post surveys. Public report next quarter. No staff in photo policy ends tomorrow morning. Service elevators opened in non-security areas. Staff addressed by name. Wages and benefits. Implement city living wage and night shift health stipend by next quarter. Listening sessions. I will host every Monday at 9 a.m. in the B1 break room. Anonymous feedback channel goes live tonight. She closed her notebook and looked straight ahead. Our cultural KPIs will include turnover rate, internal satisfaction score, percentage of complaints resolved on time, and pay gap by function. I am personally accountable for these numbers. A ripple of surprise moved through the hall, not at rhetoric but at deadlines and metrics being staked. David Chen gave a small nod, like a final stamp of authenticity. Victoria lowered the mic and turned toward the staff standing at the edges. "Ms. Gloria, thank you." Then to the blue, white, and black uniforms. "Tomorrow, if I call anyone Buddy, remind me by my own name." There were a few small, relieved laughs, but this relief had a spine. PR signaled the tech team. Behind the stage, a large screen lit up with a temporary poster. Black background, white text reading Keys for Dignity, with Marcus Reed's name and performance dates beneath. At the bottom, in small print, a community concert series by Whitmore Grand. Admission free. No flashy logo, just enough to be recognized. Victoria didn't take the honorary seat. She stepped off the platform and found a spot in the third row, between a security guard and a waitress. She folded her phone, face down on her lap, no more looking at dashboards. The room shifted with that gesture, control lowered a notch, no longer pressing down on the music. Marcus said nothing more. He sat at the piano, lid closed by a third to sweeten the bass and soften the upper register. "This one's for second chances," he said softly, "and for those who've been made invisible." The melody he wrote wasn't ornate. The opening motif was 4 notes, up a step, down a half step, back home. Like the way people hesitate then decide. Left hand kept time like night shift hallway steps. Right hand traced a line so clean you could hear the space between phrases. Midway, he glanced a shadow of summertime, not quoted whole, just nodded to, then turned into a warm harmony, not sad. He wrote for the present, not for an old resume. Victoria watched those hands and, for the first time, didn't see a performance, but labor. Labor like the cleaning shifts she had walked past. Next to her, the guard who had once blocked Marcus rested his hand on his knee, thumbed an old wedding ring, then pulled his hand back to avoid making noise. The waitress on her left counted time with her eyes, lips holding a faint smile. In the coda, Marcus skipped the fireworks. He brought back the 4 opening notes, softer this time, like a room that had learned how to say sorry properly. He lifted the pedal before the last tone could cloud. Silence fell again, now like a seat just big enough for anyone to sit in. Applause. Steady, full, but not loud. When it faded, Marcus rose and gave a small bow, enough to thank, not to repay a debt. He met Gloria's eyes. She nodded. "Well done, Marcus." He met David Chen's. Chen replied, "See you in tomorrow's column." Victoria stood with everyone else. She turned to the guard. "My name's Victoria. What's yours?" "Darren." "Nice to work with you, Darren. Tomorrow I'm taking the service elevator. You'll show me the way?" Darren nodded, the corners of his mouth easing, awkward, like someone handed back the shape of being seen. A group of guests approached Gloria, asking about Monday's listening session. She took out her notebook, wrote down names, and said, "Take service elevator B, but next week everyone uses the front door." Half joke, half truth. Enough to make a few people laugh aloud. PR laid out a hastily printed roadmap on the check-in table. Timeline, points of contact, anonymous email. Victoria's signature scrawled in the corner, not for show, but for accountability. A few young staff took photos, sent them into their internal group chat. The first comment popped up, "Call me by my name." The second, "See you Monday." David Chen paused at the Keys for Dignity poster and told a reporter, "The best script isn't hero-villain redemption. It's that after the final chord, we still have work to do." It was the kind of line that, dropped into the close of a news segment, could slow the internet's over-scripting instinct. Don't chase the ending, wait for the report. As guests began to leave, the "No Staff in Photo" sign in a hidden corner was taken down by tech crew. They hesitated, looking to Victoria. She nodded. "Remove it. Don't put it back." The empty screw hooks were left bare, a visible scar of what had been wrong. Marcus stayed until last. He covered the keys with the cloth, hand resting a beat longer than necessary, like someone closing the door to an old home. Victoria stepped up, no mic, no cameras. "Thank you for not turning me into someone else's clip," she said quietly. "Tomorrow, if I slip, remind me." "I will. And if I keep my word, remind me too." Marcus smiled. "I will, so others can see it." Outside, New York dropped another shade into night. Inside, people leaving the hall passed the cleaning crew starting their shift. They greeted each other, called each other by name. Not perfect, but in the right direction. The last line of the night didn't come from a mic. It came from the way those people looked back at those they had once made invisible. Clearer, closer. Dignity has no uniform. It has courage. The night at Whitmore Grand closed, but the lesson opened. Dignity has no uniform. It has courage. And a promise is only worth as much as the actions that keep it. Have you ever been made to feel invisible or seen someone else treated that way? What would you do to speak up next time? If this story resonates with you, please like, share it with friends, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.